The roar of 250,000 people echoes down narrow stone streets. This is ancient Rome, not in its marble halls of power, but in its chaotic, vibrant heart. The air hangs thick with the scent of baking bread, sizzling sausages, and cheap wine. Your ears are flooded with a cacophony of rhythmic shouts, the clatter of scales, and the constant bustle of commerce. You are not following an emperor or a legionary, but the true lifeblood of the city, the ancient Roman street vendor. By the end of this journey, you will know exactly how to walk through that crowd, to understand the shouts, to taste the food, and to see the city through the eyes of the people who fed and supplied an empire. We will uncover how a simple shop counter preserved in volcanic ash reveals a complete economic system, and what the graffiti scrawled on a wall tells us about the real people behind the trade. What does a civilization sound like when it is not being built by its leaders, but lived in by its people? These vendors did not work in a void. They were anchored to the physical pulse of the city, a network of commerce etched directly into the urban stone. Step out of that bustling street, and you are standing right in front of their domain, the tabernae. These were not quaint boutiques, but open-fronted workshops and shops that lined nearly every street in Rome. A broad counter of stone or marble, called a mensa, jutted out onto the sidewalk, displaying goods and serving as a transaction barrier. Behind it, a large room held supplies, a back room for storage or living, and often a staircase leading to cramped quarters above. The tabernae was the fundamental commercial cell of the city, a permanent fixture in a sea of motion, but commerce also demanded its grand stages. The Forum Romanum, the political and religious center of the world, was also, paradoxically, a marketplace. In its shadow, vendors sold everything from exotic spices and fine silks to the daily bread and wine for a senator's lunch. This was the commercial heart of the Republic, where the business of state and the business of survival intertwined. You could hear a politician's speech and then turn to haggle for a new cooking pot, all within the same sacred space. As Rome's empire and population exploded, this model evolved into something even more spectacular. Emperor Trajan built a multi-story shopping mall complex clinging to the side of the Quirinal Hill. Trajan's market was a revolutionary feat of Roman engineering and urban planning, a purpose-built commercial center with over 150 individual tabernae spread across multiple levels, connected by ramps and staircases. The ground floor shops sold fresh produce, oil, and wine, their goods often delivered directly from the Tiber River docks. The upper levels specialized in more expensive goods like spices and imported silks. Here, the chaotic energy of the street was given architectural form, a controlled environment for the immense, sprawling economy that fed 1 million people. How did an ordinary Roman navigate this vast commercial landscape? And what did they actually buy with their hard-earned coins? This commercial symphony was built on a foundation of sound. To cut through the overwhelming noise of a city of 1 million, a vendor's survival depended on his voice. Roman writers actually recorded the specific, rhythmic cries these sellers used, a marketing jingle carved not in stone, but in air. The poet Martial complains about the noise from his apartment, describing the specific shouts that woke him. One vendor might chant a simple, direct call about his lentils. Another, selling cooked chickpeas, would have a more elaborate song, praising their quality and warmth. These were not random shouts, but carefully crafted oral advertisements, designed for clarity, repetition, and memorability. The soundscape was a constant competition for attention, a battle of lungs and wit. Imagine trying to hear a friend speak over the rhythmic call of a bread seller, the insistent bell of a slave carrying a noblewoman's litter, and the competing song of a wine merchant from the next street over. It was an auditory marketplace, where the best voice often won the best business. Beyond the human voice, vendors employed simple but effective tools. A small handheld bronze bell, called a tintinnabulum, was a common sound. Its sharp metallic ring could signal the arrival of a mobile seller or the opening of a shop. For the literate, simple painted signs or stone carvings above a tabernae door might display a loaf of bread, an amphora for wine, or a pair of shoes. But for the vast majority, the primary signal was always vocal. This created a city where commerce was not something you only saw, but something you constantly heard, a living, breathing entity that told you exactly what was for sale, who was selling it, and how close they were, all without you ever needing to open your eyes. So what exactly were these voices selling, and what could an ordinary person actually afford to bring home for dinner? The air itself was a menu, a layered scent of roasting meats, baking dough, and simmering legumes. For the vast majority of Romans, the street vendor was their kitchen. These mobile cooks and shopkeepers offered a dizzying array of ready-to-eat meals for a populace that often lived in cramped insulae apartments with little to no cooking facilities. The most fundamental item was bread. Bakeries, often combined with mills, produced loaves of various qualities, from the coarse panis plebeius for the poor to finer, whiter breads for the wealthy. But bread was just the beginning. You would hear the sizzle of lukaniki, a spicy pork sausage seasoned with cumin, pepper, and herbs, grilled right there on a portable brazier. For a more filling meal, a customer might buy a bowl of pulse, a simple but hearty chickpea or farro stew, kept warm in a large pot over a low fire. Near the Tiber River, the smell of frying oil would signal vendors offering small, fresh-caught fish, cooked crisp and served with a splash of vinegar. And to wash it all down, there was wine. It was almost never drunk straight, but watered down and sold from large amphorae into a customer's own jug or a shared drinking cup. This was not the fine vintage of a patrician's banquet, but a sharp, often ricinated common wine, the daily fuel of the laborer and the clerk alike, who was buying all this food. The customer base was as diverse as the city itself. The early morning saw construction workers and dock hands grabbing a quick, calorie-dense breakfast of bread and pulse before a long day of manual labor. The midday break would bring clerks, shopkeepers, and even lower-level officials to the counters, all needing a fast, hot lunch that required no preparation. Slaves sent on errands for their wealthy households might also be customers, picking up specific items or a quick meal for themselves. The street food economy was a great social leveler, a necessity for nearly everyone who did not belong to the tiny, landed elite with their private kitchens and staff. Each transaction was a tiny thread in the vast social and economic fabric of the city, a daily ritual of sustenance that played out on every corner. But how did these vendors manage their business, track their sales, and turn a profit in such a competitive environment? That daily ritual of buying lunch was centered on a specific, brilliant piece of Roman design, the thermopolium. Think of it not as a full restaurant, but as the ancient world's ultimate fast food counter. While a tabernae could sell anything from shoes to wine, the thermopolium had a single delicious purpose: to serve hot, ready-to-eat food and drink to people on the go. Its name literally means a place where something hot is sold. The most distinctive feature was its counter, a permanent stone or marble barrier facing the street. Embedded directly into this counter were large, rounded terracotta jars called dolia. These were not for display, they were the functional heart of the business. Each dolia was a deep, sturdy pot, sealed to keep its contents warm or preserved. One jar might hold a steaming chickpea and farro stew, another could be filled with a hearty lentil soup, and a third might contain olives or dried fruits. A customer would walk up, point to what they wanted, and the vendor would ladle a portion directly from the dolia into a dish or a piece of bread the customer used as a bowl. It was the peak of efficiency, a system designed for speed and volume in a city that never stopped moving. The social function of the thermopolium went far beyond mere convenience. This was the Roman equivalent of a neighborhood pub or a local coffee shop, a vital social hub for the lower and middle classes. Here, a laborer, a shopkeeper, and a slave could all stand side by side, sharing a quick meal and the latest gossip. It was a place of informal business deals, of news from the provinces, of complaints about the price of grain. The atmosphere was likely loud, bustling, and intensely communal. Unlike the private, segregated dining rooms of the wealthy, the thermopolium was public life in its purest form, a space where the social hierarchy of Rome softened for a few moments over a shared bowl of hot food. Our clearest window into this world comes from the ash-preserved streets of Pompeii. Archaeologists have uncovered over 80 thermopolia in that city alone, each with its own character. One of the most famous, the Thermopolium of Asalina, has a beautifully painted counter showing scenes of daily life. Another, the Thermopolium of Vetutius Placidus, features a stunning fresco of the Roman god of trade, Mercury, and the protector of households, Bacchus, painted right above the dolia, as if blessing the business. Some even had small, decorated shrines or lararia built into the counter where the owner would make offerings for good fortune. These were not grimy, hidden-away holes. They were often brightly painted, proudly maintained establishments, the center of their block's social universe. The preserved counters, with their deep jar holes still visible, make the ancient routine feel immediate. You can almost see the vendor wiping his hands on a cloth, hear the clink of a coin on the stone counter, and smell the warm, savory steam rising from those embedded pots. But who was behind that counter, running these thriving businesses that fed the city's engine? The savory steam rising from the Thermopolium counters was just one thread in a much richer tapestry of commerce. While food vendors fed the city's body, a parallel economy of goods merchants supplied its daily life, creating a consumer culture of remarkable diversity right on the street. The same cacophony of shouts that advertised hot sausages also promoted the sale of sturdy pottery lamps, brightly colored textiles, and delicate bronze jewelry. For every customer buying a bowl of stew, another was haggling for a new tunic or a protective amulet. This was the true scale of Rome's market, a sprawling, open-air department store where every imaginable need and modest desire could be met. A shopper navigating the crowded streets would be confronted with an astonishing variety of wares. Potters and their agents sold everything from massive storage jars, called dolia, to the fine, red-gloss tableware known as terra sigillata. Lamp sellers displayed simple, functional oil lamps made of clay, often decorated with images of gods, gladiators, or animals. A flickering flame in one of these lamps was the primary source of artificial light for millions of Romans after sunset. Textile merchants offered raw wool, dyed yarns, and finished cloth, while ready-to-wear clothing sellers provided tunics and cloaks for those who could not make their own. For a special occasion or a moment of personal indulgence, a jewelry vendor might offer cheap glass bead necklaces, bronze rings, or even counterfeit pearls for those aspiring to a wealthier look. Much of this trade catered to the practical and spiritual needs of the common people. Alongside the essential household items, vendors sold a vast array of cheap trinkets and religious tokens. A mother might purchase a small terracotta figurine of the goddess Venus for her daughter, or a laborer might buy a bronze amulet in the shape of a phallus, a popular symbol believed to ward off evil and bring good fortune. These items were not luxuries, but integral parts of everyday Roman life, affordable pieces of magic and devotion available to almost anyone with a few small coins. The sheer volume of such artifacts found by archaeologists proves these were not rare purchases, but a constant, thriving trade. This bustling marketplace of goods reveals a sophisticated and layered consumer economy. It operated on multiple tiers, from the merchant importing fine silk from the east for the elite, down to the hawker selling recycled glass beads and second-hand sandals to the urban poor. The presence of these non-food vendors demonstrates that even those of modest means participated in a cash-based market for non-essential goods. They were buying more than just survival. They were purchasing identity, comfort, superstition, and small pleasures. The desire for a new lamp, a brighter piece of cloth, or a lucky charm was a powerful economic engine, one driven by the aspirations of the millions who called Rome home. How did these countless small transactions, these coins changing hands for a meal or a trinket, coalesce into the financial structure that powered an empire? Every transaction, every portion of stew, every measure of grain relied on a silent partner, the physical tool that made the exchange possible. The Roman street vendor was a master of efficiency. his entire business defined by the simple, sturdy implements he used every day. At the heart of most sales was the scale. A vendor would carry a simple balance scale, a statera with a bronze beam and two pans. Standardized bronze or stone weights, often marked with their value, were used to counter the goods being sold. But this system was famously ripe for deception. A shady vendor might use two sets of weights, one honest for buying and another, heavier set for selling, tricking customers by tilting the scale in his favor. Authorities tried to combat this, and archaeologists have even found official standard weights stamped with the name of the official in charge, a direct attempt to curb a timeless form of fraud. For liquids like wine, oil, or the popular fish sauce garum, precise measurement was just as crucial. Vendors used a set of standardized bronze or pottery vessels. The most common was the sextarius, a unit roughly equivalent to a modern pint. A customer would bring their own jug, and the vendor would fill a measured sextarius container, then pour it in, repeating until the order was complete. This reliance on measurement shows a society deeply concerned with fairness, or at least the appearance of it, in its most basic daily interactions. The tools of cooking were just as vital and visible. The portable brazier or foculus was the mobile kitchen. This small, square bronze or iron stand, filled with hot coals, could be set up anywhere. A vendor would place a sturdy cooking pot, a kakabis, directly on it to simmer stews or boil pulses. For grilling sausages or small fish, a simple iron grill sat atop the coals. The sizzle and smoke from these braziers were as much a part of the city's atmosphere as the vendor's shouts. For storage and transport, the humble basket and the cart were indispensable. Large, tightly woven baskets carried fresh bread, fruits, and vegetables, protecting them from dust and sun. Vendors on the move, or those selling heavier goods like pottery, relied on simple two-wheeled carts. These could be pulled by the seller himself or by a single donkey, transforming any street corner into a temporary shop. The archaeological record brings these objects to life. In Pompeii, the complete skeleton of a vendor was found trapped with a scale and a handful of coins, his business interrupted in an instant. Excavations of Thermopolia consistently uncover the deep dolia jars embedded in the counters, their interiors often stained from centuries of holding oil, wine, or nuts. These are not grand monuments, but the quiet, personal artifacts of economic survival. Each scratched weight, each soot-blackened pot, tells a story of a life spent measuring, cooking, and persuading, one small transaction at a time. Behind that bustling counter, a complex social world was at work. The person serving your stew or measuring your grain was almost never a Roman citizen of high birth. The street vendor occupied a specific, and often precarious, rung on the social ladder. Many were freedmen, former slaves who had been granted their liberty. For a freedman, opening a thermopolium or a small shop was one of the few viable paths to economic independence. Others were slaves themselves, working directly for their master, who owned the business and took the profits. And many were simply the freeborn urban poor, citizens in name but with little wealth or influence, relying on their wits and their labor to survive. This was a trade built on hard work, not social prestige. The Roman elite, writers like Cicero and Seneca, often looked down upon this kind of manual commerce. They considered it vulgar, a distasteful scramble for small profits that was beneath the dignity of a true gentleman. A wealthy Roman's ideal was to live off the income from his agricultural estates, not to dirty his hands with trade. This created a profound social irony. The entire city, including the elite themselves, depended utterly on these vendors for their daily food and supplies, yet the people providing this essential service were often viewed with disdain. The street vendor lived in the tension between societal necessity and social stigma, but within their own circles, these vendors could achieve a respected form of success. A freedman who built a thriving business could earn a comfortable living, save money, and even become a patron to others in his neighborhood. His shop was a hub of local influence. The graffiti found in Pompeii gives us glimpses of this. In one instance, a political endorsement is scrawled on a wall, reading, "His neighbors urge you to elect Gaius Julius Priscus as duumvir." This was not written by a senator, but by the baker, the barber, and the wine seller from his street. Their collective voice held real power in local affairs. So while they were excluded from the highest echelons of power, successful vendors could become pillars of their own communities, their economic standing granting them a form of social capital that the aristocracy might sneer at, but could not erase. This was a world of relentless motion and ambition, where the clink of a coin could signify a step up a ladder that was never meant for climbing. His day begins long before the first customer arrives, in the deep, silent hours long before dawn. A man named Lucius, a freedman who runs a thermopolium near the Tiber River, is already awake. He moves through the darkness of his small room above the shop, his mind focused on the tasks ahead. Downstairs, he must stoke the embers in the portable braziers back to life, the first warmth in the cold stone room. The large terracotta jars embedded in the counter need to be filled, the chickpea stew from yesterday reheated, the fresh lentils put on to simmer. He checks his supply of bread, purchased from the baker whose shop is already glowing with the heat of his oven a few streets away. Every minute of this quiet preparation is a race against the rising sun. Securing his prime spot on a busy street corner was a hard-won victory, and losing a single customer to a faster competitor is a defeat he cannot afford. As the sky begins to lighten from black to deep blue, the first sounds of the city stir, the clatter of cartwheels bringing goods from the docks, the lowing of oxen, the first tentative calls of other vendors. Lucius takes his place behind the counter. He is open for business. The morning rush is a relentless tide of need. The first customers are the dock workers and laborers, men whose bodies demand calories for a long day of lifting and hauling. They move quickly, exchanging a few low-value coins for a thick piece of bread dipped straight into the steaming lentil pot. There is little conversation, only the efficient exchange of sustenance for copper. Lucius works with a practiced rhythm, ladling stew taking coins, his hands a blur of motion. By the time the sun is fully above the rooftops, the crowd shifts. Now come the clerks, the shopkeepers from nearby tabernae, and slaves sent on errands from wealthier households. They are slightly less hurried, sometimes requesting a specific cut of sausage or a larger portion of the more expensive fish stew. This is when the social heart of the thermopolium begins to beat. A regular customer might lean against the counter for a moment, sharing a complaint about the price of olive oil or a juicy piece of gossip heard in the forum. Lucius listens, nods, and serves, his shop acting as a nerve center for the neighborhood's news. The midday lull is not a rest, but a different kind of work. The flow of customers slows to a trickle under the punishing heat of the afternoon sun. This is when Lucius must deal with the other forces that govern his life. A rival vendor might send a slave to casually observe his prices, prompting a quick, internal calculation on whether to adjust his own. Then comes the visit he dreads, the low-ranking official making his rounds to check the accuracy of the bronze weights used on the scales. Lucius holds his breath as the man compares his weights against the official standard. A discrepancy, even an accidental one, could mean a fine he can ill afford. Once the official moves on, a wave of relief is followed by the tedious work of the afternoon, scrubbing the cooking pots, refilling the nearly empty dolia jars with olives and dried fruits, and counting the day's take so far, sorting the worn copper asses from the more valuable silver denarii. Each coin is a small victory, a tangible measure of his family's security. As the long shadows of evening stretch across the street, a final wave of customers arrives. Men returning from their work, their energy spent, seek a hot meal to carry home. The atmosphere becomes more relaxed, almost festive. The sharp, competitive shouts of the morning vendors soften into conversational tones. Lucius might share a watered-down cup of wine with a longtime customer, discussing the upcoming chariot races or the health of a neighbor's child. Finally, as darkness settles, the city's noise begins to ebb. Lucius extinguishes the braziers, the last tendrils of smoke carrying the day's final sense of food into the night air. He covers the dolia jars, sweeps the floor of crumbs and discarded olive pits, and brings his scale and money box inside. Bolting the heavy wooden shutters over his shop front, he is alone again with the silence. The counter that was a stage for 1,000 daily dramas is now just a cold stone barrier. He climbs the stairs, his body aching, his mind already turning over the calculations for tomorrow. His world is just a few square feet of street, but within it, he has built a life. That small, hard-won pile of coins on Lucius's counter did not belong to him alone. The Roman state had a long reach, and it extended directly into the pockets of every street vendor. The government viewed this chaotic commerce not just as a public nuisance, but as a vital source of revenue and a matter of public order. A complex web of laws and regulations dictated nearly every aspect of a vendor's business, from the very ground he stood on to the weight of the bread he sold. First and foremost was the issue of location. A vendor could not simply set up his cart or brazier anywhere he pleased. Public space was carefully managed. The aediles, the city officials in charge of public works and markets, had the authority to assign and police specific spots. A prime location on a busy street corner, like the one Lucius occupied, was a license privilege. This right to use public land for private profit came with a price, a tax known as the vectigal. This was essentially a rental fee paid to the state for the use of that valuable piece of pavement. For a vendor with a permanent thermopolium counter, the vectigal was a fixed cost of doing business. For a mobile seller with a cart, it might be a daily or weekly payment, a constant drain on his meager profits. Failure to pay meant immediate expulsion from the spot, or worse, confiscation of his goods and scales. The state's interest, however, went far beyond simple taxation. Public health and safety were genuine concerns in a crowded, combustible city. The aediles enforced basic hygiene standards, particularly for food sellers. They could inspect a thermopolium's dolia jars for cleanliness, order a vendor to cover his food from dust and flies, and even confiscate spoiled meat or rancid oil. The risk of fire was also a constant preoccupation. The use of open braziers was tightly controlled. Vendors were often required to have buckets of water or sand readily available, and setting up a cooking station too close to a wooden building could lead to a hefty fine. These were some of the world's earliest consumer protection laws, born from practical necessity in a densely packed urban environment. Perhaps the most common point of friction, and the most frequently legislated, was the issue of fair measurement. The Roman state understood that public trust in the marketplace was essential for social stability. Laws against using false weights and measures were strict and repeatedly emphasized. As we saw, vendors used bronze or stone weights with their balance scales. These weights were supposed to be officially certified. Aediles would conduct random inspections, comparing a vendor's weights against the public standard kept in the forum. The penalties for cheating were severe. A vendor caught using a light weight to shortchange a customer could face a significant fine, a public flogging, or even temporary exile from the city. In a society where a family's entire food budget could be destabilized by a single dishonest transaction, the state positioned itself, at least in theory, as the guardian of the poor against predatory commerce. This legal landscape created a delicate dance of survival for the vendor. He had to navigate the demands of the tax collector, the inspections of the market official, and the constant pressure of competition, all while trying to earn enough to feed his own family. Some of this regulation was undoubtedly beneficial, preventing the worst abuses and maintaining a basic level of order, but it also added another layer of vulnerability. A vendor's livelihood could be destroyed by a single bad inspection or an inability to pay his vectigal after a slow week. The government's hand was always present, a silent partner in every transaction, ensuring that the vibrant, chaotic song of the street was always sung within the boundaries of Roman law. The constant din of commerce was not music to every Roman's ears. For the wealthy elite living in their spacious homes, the vibrant street life was an unbearable nuisance, a daily assault on their peace and privilege. The satirist Juvenal gives us their perspective in a furious, mocking rant. He describes a sleepless night in the city, tormented by the roar of a passing wagon, the curses of its driver, and the noise of a crowd gathered around a broken-down cart. But woven into this chaos are the specific sounds of vendors, the rhythmic pounding of the baker's mill, and the constant, piercing shouts of the food sellers. For Juvenal, this is not the sound of a thriving city, but the soundtrack of his own misery. The smells were another source of bitter complaint. The elite idealized the fresh air of their country villas, and the potent mixture of sizzling sausage, fat, cheap wine, and sewage that hung over the commercial streets was the very essence of urban squalor in their minds. A wealthy senator stepping out of his secluded domus would be immediately confronted by the pungent cloud from a nearby thermopolium, a sensory boundary between his refined world and the gritty reality of the city that surrounded him. This was more than just an irritation. It was a constant reminder that their world of marble and order was built upon, and utterly dependent on, this noisy, smelly, and relentless economy. The conflict over public space was inevitable. The elite saw the streets as arteries for dignified movement, while vendors saw them as veins of commerce. Wealthy homeowners complained that carts and stalls clogged the narrow thoroughfares, making it difficult for their litters to pass. They argued that the crowds attracted by vendors were a security risk, a cover for thieves and pickpockets. In response, they used their political power to push for restrictions. There is evidence that some city districts, particularly those with a high concentration of aristocratic residences, attempted to ban certain types of vending, especially the mobile cart sellers who created the most obstruction. The aediles, the same officials who taxed the vendors, were also responsible for responding to these complaints from the powerful. The result was a low-grade urban war, a constant tug of war over the right to the city's pavement. A vendor's prime spot was not just a commercial asset, but a fragile victory in this ongoing conflict. He could be ordered to move on by an official responding to a complaint from a single influential neighbor. This tension reveals a fundamental Roman paradox. The elite class relied on the street vendors for their daily sustenance, with slaves sent out to buy bread, wine, and cooked meats, yet they despised the very presence and noise of the people who provided it. They wanted the product of the street, but not the street itself. The vendor's world was therefore one of constant negotiation, not just over the price of lentils, but over his very right to exist in the space he occupied. His livelihood was perpetually at the mercy of a complaint, a new regulation, or the whim of a politician seeking the favor of his wealthy constituents. How did these ordinary men and women, living in the shadow of such power and prejudice, manage to leave any mark on history beyond the complaints of their detractors? The complaints of the elite and the daily struggles of vendors like Lucius would have faded into obscurity if not for a single, catastrophic event. In the year 79, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius did more than destroy the towns around its base. It froze them in time. The volcanic ash that buried Pompeii created an unparalleled archaeological snapshot, sealing the world of the Roman street vendor in a state of perfect preservation. Walking through the excavated streets today is like stepping directly into Lucius's world, with the stone counters still standing and the jars still waiting for customers. One of the most vivid examples is the Thermopolium of Vetutius Placidus. Its beautiful painted counter features a vibrant fresco of two gods, Mercury, the patron of commerce, and Bacchus, the god of wine, a clear advertisement of the goods and divine favor on offer. But the real magic is in the practical details. Embedded in that counter are the familiar Dolia jars, and when archaeologists excavated them, they found residue at the bottom. Scientific analysis revealed the traces of their final offerings, a mixture of beans, pork, and goat meat, a hearty stew that was never served. Even the financial records survived in a way. A small pile of coins was found on the counter, the day's earnings left behind in the sudden chaos. This was not just a shop, it was a business in full swing, interrupted at its busiest hour. Further down the street, the Thermopolium of Asalina presents an even more personal story. Its counter is decorated with beautiful paintings, and above it, a series of names were found, elegantly painted on the wall. The names are Asalina, Smiana, Eagle, and Maria. Most scholars believe these were the names of the waitresses or enslaved women who worked at the counter. This simple list of names transforms a ruin into a workplace, giving identity to the people who once stood there, ladling wine and stew for a living. The discovery of a bronze drinking vessel, a set of lamps, and even a small, personal collection of gems and amulets suggests these women kept their own small treasures close by as they worked. Here, the grand narrative of Roman commerce narrows to the story of 4 individuals. Not all vendors operated from permanent counters. In the House of the Lovers, a name derived from a fresco of a kissing couple, archaeologists made a different kind of find. Just inside the entrance, they uncovered the skeleton of a man crouched next to a large, circular container. Inside it were stacks of small, plain clay cups. He was not the homeowner, but a street vendor who had taken shelter in the doorway, his entire inventory of cheap drinking vessels still with him, ready to be sold to thirsty passers-by for a fraction of a coin. His story is a silent, heartbreaking testament to the mobility and vulnerability of the smallest-scale traders, men whose entire shop could be carried in their arms. What do these intimate finds tell us as a whole? They prove that the street vending economy was not a monolithic system, but a diverse ecosystem. It ranged from the well-established, decorated thermopolium with its staff of workers, down to the solitary cup seller with his basket of wares. The preservation of food residue, coins, and even personal items confirms the bustling, cash-based reality described in texts, but with a tangible intimacy no scroll can provide. In Pompeii, the theory of the street vendor becomes flesh and bone, steam and coin. We are not just told that vendors sold hot food, we can see the pots they cooked it in. We are not just told they used scales, we find the weights and the beams. This was a world of real people with names like Asalina and Maria, who went to work one morning and never came home, leaving behind a perfect, tragic record of the vibrant, noisy, and essential economy that fed, supplied, and defined an entire civilization. The steam rising from the dolia jar carried more than just the scent of chickpea stew. It carried the invisible weight of an entire system of human ownership. For every freedman like Lucius who owned his own counter, there were countless others who stood there not for their own profit, but under the absolute control of a master. The bustling, seemingly free market was, in fact, deeply dependent on enslaved labor. Many of the stalls and shops were not owned by the person serving you, but by a wealthy citizen who viewed them as a remote, hands-off investment. He would supply the capital, secure the location, and then install an enslaved man or woman to run the daily operations. This enslaved vendor would wake before dawn, manage the inventory, haggle with customers, and handle the money, but at the end of the day, every single coin went directly into the master's coffers. Their labor powered the commerce, yet they had no legal claim to its fruits. The system created a bizarre, intense dynamic right there at the counter. The customer interacting with an enslaved vendor was facing a person with the power to negotiate a price, but with no real autonomy over the business. The vendor, in turn, had to be charming and persuasive to drive sales, all while knowing that any mistake, any shortfall in the day's earnings, could result in punishment. They were acting entrepreneurs in a play where they owned nothing, not even their own time. This arrangement was a brilliant, ruthless financial strategy for the Roman elite. It allowed the wealthy to profit from the booming street economy without engaging in the vulgarity of trade themselves. A senator could own a chain of thermopolia across the city, managed by his enslaved stewards, and collect a steady income while maintaining his social status. The enslaved individuals were the living, breathing machinery of this profit engine. Their knowledge of the neighborhood, their relationships with suppliers, and their skill at sales directly enriched an owner who might never even visit the shop. Beyond managing shops, many enslaved people were producers, forced to sell what they made. An enslaved woman might be skilled at weaving or sewing, and her master would require her to sell her textiles at a market stall, turning over all proceeds. A man with a talent for metalworking could be forced to craft cheap jewelry or tools and then hawk them on the street. In this scenario, the enslaved person was both factory and sales force, their personal talents harnessed and exploited for another's gain. Any small hope of saving a few coins to one day buy their freedom depended entirely on the master's willingness to allow it, a fragile dream in a system designed for their subjugation. How did this shape the social fabric of the street? It meant that the vibrant, egalitarian spirit of the thermopolium was often an illusion. The camaraderie between customer and vendor could be genuine, but it existed atop a foundation of profound inequality. The enslaved vendor was performing freedom, acting the part of the independent shopkeeper for the sake of commerce, while living a reality of total dependency. This hidden layer of exploitation was the dark engine humming beneath the market's cheerful noise, a reminder that the Roman world, for all its sophistication, was built on a fundamental and brutal injustice. The constant clink of copper was the true music of the Roman street. For vendors and customers alike, the silver denarius was a rare sight, the currency of major purchases and elite transactions. The real engine of daily commerce was a handful of much smaller, low-value coins made of bronze or copper. The most common was the as, a heavy bronze coin that was the workhorse of the street economy. For even smaller purchases, you had the quadrans, a tiny bronze piece worth only a quarter of an as. Think of the as a single-dollar bill and the quadrans as a quarter. A loaf of common bread might cost one as. A cup of cheap wine or a small serving of lentils could be had for a single quadrans. This was a cash economy built on tiny increments, where the price of a full meal was a careful calculation of these small, worn coins. Every transaction was a miniature drama of negotiation. Fixed prices were a rarity. Haggling was not just common, it was the expected ritual of every sale. A customer would approach a counter, point to a sausage, and ask the price. The vendor would name a figure, intentionally inflated to leave room for the inevitable back and forth. The customer would counter with a much lower offer, perhaps pointing out a slight char on the sausage or complaining about the general cost of living. The vendor would act offended, defending the quality of his meat and the fairness of his price. This verbal dance could last several minutes, a performance for both parties that was as much about social interaction as it was about economics. The final agreed-upon price was a point of honor and a small victory for both the buyer, who saved a quadrans, and the seller, who still turned a profit. How do we know this was the reality? The evidence is literally buried in the shops themselves. Archaeologists excavating Thermopolia and other commercial spaces in Pompeii have found small, hidden hoards of coins, often tucked away in a space beneath the counter or in a crack in the wall. These are not the vast treasures of the wealthy, but the day's takings, the vendor's petty cash. The composition of these hoards is telling. They are overwhelmingly made up of these low-value bronze coins, the asses and quadrantes, with only the occasional silver denarius mixed in. One such hoard, found in a thermopolium, contained over 500 coins, almost all bronze. This is the physical proof of a high-volume, low-margin business. Each coin in that pile represented a single sale, a successfully concluded haggle, a bowl of stew or a measure of wine that passed from the vendor's jar into the hands of a hungry Roman. This system of small change created a remarkable level of economic accessibility. Even a poor laborer earning a few asses a day could participate in the market. He could decide to spend one coin on bread, another on a bit of sausage, and save a third for a cup of wine after his shift. This granularity of currency empowered the poor with consumer choice, however limited. It allowed them to prioritize, to indulge in small luxuries, and to navigate their daily hunger with a degree of autonomy. The humble as and quadrans were more than just metal. They were the keys that unlocked the vibrant, chaotic, and essential world of the street. But the marketplace was not just a place for buying things you could hold in your hand. For every vendor selling bread or pottery, there was another selling something even more vital, a service. These were the human utilities of ancient Rome, the essential workers whose labor kept the city's social and personal life functioning. The most fundamental of all was water. While Rome was famous for its aqueducts, That water primarily flowed to public fountains and the homes of the wealthy. For the millions living in cramped upper-story apartments, carrying water up multiple flights of stairs was a daily burden. This need created a profession, the aquarii or water carriers. These men would fill large leather bags or clay amphorae at public fountains and then haul them through the streets, selling bucketfuls door to door for a small fee. Their work was back-breaking, a constant climb against gravity that quenched the thirst of an entire city, one heavy step at a time. Just as essential was the service of the scribe. In a city where perhaps only a quarter of the population was fully literate, the ability to read and write was a valuable commodity. Scribes set up small, portable tables in busy porticos or near the forum, offering their skills to the illiterate masses. A soldier wanting to send a letter home to his family in Gaul would seek out a scribe. A merchant needing a contract drawn up, or a mother dictating a message to her married daughter in another neighborhood, all relied on this street corner intellectual. The scribe would listen carefully, his stylus scratching across a wax tablet, translating spoken words into permanent record. He was more than just a human pen. He was a confidant, a legal advisor, and a vital link in the chain of communication that held the far-flung empire together through the personal words of its people. Then there were the barbers, the tonsors, who turned any sunny patch of sidewalk into an open-air salon. Their shops were mobile, consisting of a simple stool, a set of razors and shears, and a small mirror. A client would take a seat, and the barber would go to work, all while a crowd of passers-by jostled just feet away. This was not a private, peaceful experience. Roman writers describe the barber as a notorious gossip, the hub of neighborhood news. As he shaved a client's beard or trimmed his hair, he would relay the latest political rumors, scandals, and business deals. You went to the barber not just for a haircut, but for the daily bulletin. It was a socially awkward situation, sitting exposed and vulnerable with a sharp razor at your throat, forced to listen to the barber's chatter or risk a nasty slip. This service was as much about social connection as it was about grooming, a public ritual that maintained both personal appearance and the community's information network. These service vendors completed the ecosystem, proving that the Roman street was not merely a mall, but a living, functioning society where every human need, from a drink of water to a written word, had a price and a provider. A simple bronze amulet or a small terracotta statue was more than a decoration. It was a shield against the chaos of the world. The same marketplace that sold food and drink also dealt in divine protection. Vendors specialized in religious and superstitious goods, their stalls forming a kind of spiritual pharmacy for the anxieties of daily life. You could buy a small, crudely molded terracotta hand, meant as a votive offering to the gods in thanks for a healed injury. A mother might purchase a tiny bulla, a locket, for her son to wear around his neck, containing a charm to ward off the evil eye. These items were mass-produced and affordable, making divine favor a product available to nearly every Roman with a few small coins. This trade reveals a society deeply interwoven with ritual, where the boundary between commerce and faith was virtually non-existent. The gods themselves were considered active participants in the success or failure of a business. A vendor's most important divine ally was Mercury, the quick-footed messenger god. He was the patron of commerce, profit, and negotiation, the ultimate salesman. A prudent shopkeeper would have a small shrine, a lararium, tucked into a corner of his thermopolium, featuring a statuette of Mercury. Each morning, before the first customer arrived, the vendor would make a small offering, a few grains of incense, a drop of wine, to ask for the gods' favor in attracting customers and ensuring honest deals. His image was everywhere, a reminder that good business required both human hustle and divine blessing. But Mercury did not work alone. For a food vendor, the appropriate god to appease might be Fornax, the goddess of the baker's oven, to ensure his bread rose perfectly. A vendor selling wine or garum would naturally pray to Bacchus, the god of the vine. These daily rituals were as much a part of the business routine as stocking the dolia jars or sharpening knives. To neglect them was to invite misfortune, a concept the Romans called invidia, the envy of the gods or even one's neighbors, which could sour milk, scare away customers, or cause a scale to break. The marketplace was therefore a landscape of invisible forces. A successful transaction was not just good haggling, it was a sign of divine approval. A run of bad luck, on the other hand, might be interpreted as a sign that a rival had made a more powerful sacrifice or that you had inadvertently offended a deity. This belief system created a vibrant economy for religious vendors, who sold the very tools needed to navigate this uncertain spiritual terrain. The line between a merchant and a priest could be thin. The same man who sold you a lucky charm might also advise you on which god to petition for a specific problem. In a world full of risks, sickness, theft, business failure, these cheap charms and daily prayers were a form of psychological insurance, a way for ordinary people to feel a measure of control over forces far greater than themselves. How did these deeply personal beliefs and the bustling trade they inspired leave a permanent mark on the city stone? The scent of cumin and pepper in a Roman stew was a whisper from a world away. The vibrant, chaotic street market was the final destination for a supply chain that stretched across the known world, connecting the shouts of a vendor in the Subura to the spice caravans of the Silk Road and the merchant ships of the Indian Ocean. When a customer purchased a pinch of pepper for their meal, they were participating in a global economy of staggering complexity. This was not a separate luxury market for the elite, but a system whose ripples reached down to the most common street corner. Roman demand was so immense that it reshaped entire landscapes and trade routes, pulling the treasures of 3 continents directly into its urban heart. Spices were the most famous of these imports. Black pepper, grown almost exclusively in southern India, was a ubiquitous presence. It was so common that the satirist Apuleius describes a street vendor using a pepper grinder to season a cheap sausage. This was not a rare delicacy, but a standard condiment, its price driven down by the sheer volume of its import. Archaeologists have even found peppercorns in the stomach contents of a victim from Herculaneum, a final, poignant testament to its everyday use. Other spices filled the air, too. Cinnamon from Sri Lanka, ginger from China, and cloves from the distant Moluccan Islands all found their way into Roman cooking and medicine, sold by vendors who likely knew nothing of their exotic origins beyond the fact that customers were willing to pay for their intense aroma and flavor. But the global trade was not limited to things you could smell and taste. A wealthy matron walking through the market might run her fingers over a bolt of silk, a fabric so light and lustrous it seemed magical. This silk, known as seers, came from China, a land so distant it was nearly mythical to the average Roman. The journey was epic, passing through countless middlemen across Central Asia before finally reaching Syrian merchants, who then shipped it to the ports of Italy. The cost was astronomical, making it a symbol of extreme wealth and decadence. Yet even here, the street vendor played a role. Smaller, cheaper scraps of silk or partially silk fabrics would be sold for hair ribbons, decorative trims, or other small luxuries, allowing those of more modest means to participate in the allure of the exotic. From the cold northern forests came another treasure, amber. This fossilized tree resin, washed up on the shores of the Baltic Sea, was carved into beads, pendants, and amulets that were immensely popular. The amber route was a river of gold stretching from the Baltic through the heart of Germania, down to the Danube, and into the hands of Roman traders. On the street, a vendor might sell a small, polished amber bead, promising its protective powers or its beautiful warm glow. Each of these objects, a peppercorn, a silk thread, an amber bead, was a tiny piece of geographical and human history. They represented thousands of miles of travel, the labor of countless unknown hands, and the insatiable appetite of the city that lay at the center of the world. The local street was, in fact, a global marketplace in miniature, a daily reminder that the empire's true power lay not just in its legions, but in its ability to pull the ends of the earth directly to its doorstep. That tantalizing scent of sizzling sausage carried a hidden menace. In the sweltering Roman heat, without any form of refrigeration, food spoilage was a constant and dangerous threat. A stew left in its dolia jar for too long could quickly become a toxic brew, and a piece of meat exposed to the sun for hours was a gamble with every bite. The Romans were not ignorant of these risks, and they developed a set of practices, part practical and part superstition, to navigate this perilous culinary landscape. The most common method of preservation was salting. Meat and fish were heavily salted or submerged in brine to draw out moisture and inhibit bacterial growth. This is why garum, the fermented fish sauce, was so ubiquitous. It was a powerful preservative and flavor enhancer rolled into one. Smoking was another technique, used for cheeses and certain meats, giving them a longer shelf life and a distinctive taste. Yet for the daily offerings of a thermopolium, these methods only went so far. A vendor's most crucial tool was his own senses. He would routinely smell his stocks of meat and pots of stew, and he would taste a small sample himself to check for any sourness or off flavors before serving it to a customer. This was a world before health inspectors or expiration dates, where the vendor's nose and palate were the primary, and terrifyingly fallible, line of defense. The consequences of failure were severe. Ancient writers like Galen described symptoms of food poisoning that would be all too familiar today: violent stomach cramps, fever, and debilitating diarrhea. In a crowded, unsanitary city where dehydration could kill quickly, a bad meal was not just an inconvenience, it was a genuine medical emergency, especially for the already malnourished poor. The government understood this threat to public order. The aediles, the market officials, did have the power to inspect food stalls and confiscate goods that were visibly rotten or foul-smelling. A vendor caught selling spoiled food could face a heavy fine or even a public flogging, but their oversight was reactive, not preventative. They could punish a vendor for selling a rancid sausage, but they had no way to ensure the sausage was safe when it was first cooked hours earlier. This created a marketplace built on a fragile trust. A customer's loyalty to a specific thermopolium was not just about taste, it was a survival strategy, a bet that this particular vendor was diligent, honest, and lucky enough to keep his food safe. You developed a relationship with the man who fed you, because your life could literally depend on his cleanliness. That daily gamble with spoiled food and the constant threat of a fine left a vendor profoundly vulnerable. In a city with no concept of public welfare, survival often depended on finding strength in numbers. This is where the collegia came in. These were not trade unions in the modern sense, but professional guilds or burial clubs that offered a fragile shield against the brutal uncertainties of life. For a street vendor, joining the collegium of the bakers, or the wine merchants, or the general food sellers, was a crucial step toward securing a small piece of stability. The most fundamental and most valued benefit of a collegium was a proper burial. In a sprawling, anonymous metropolis, the fear of dying penniless and being tossed into a mass, unmarked grave was very real. Members paid regular dues into a common fund, and in return, the collegium guaranteed that when a member died, his funeral would be paid for and his body would be laid to rest with dignity in a collective tomb, often bearing the guild's name. This was not a small thing. It was a powerful promise of social dignity that extended beyond death itself. But the collegia offered more than just a dignified end. They were a social safety net for the living. If a member's business burned down, or if he fell too ill to work, the collegium might provide a small loan or a distribution of food from its treasury to help his family through the crisis. This mutual aid was the closest thing an ordinary Roman had to insurance. A network of colleagues who recognized that any one of them could be the next to face disaster. Beyond this practical support, the collegia were vibrant social and religious centers. They organized lavish annual festivals in honor of their patron deity. The Bakers' Guild, for instance, would hold a great feast for the goddess Fornax, complete with sacrifices, processions, and a shared meal for all members. For a few hours, the lowly bread seller was not a solitary figure haggling on a street corner, but an honored participant in a grand celebration, his profession elevated to something worthy of divine favor and communal pride. These gatherings reinforced bonds, allowed for networking, and provided a rare respite from the grind of daily commerce. While they rarely had the power to strike or negotiate wages, collegia could also act as a collective voice. A guild of food vendors might pool their resources to send a delegation to the ediles, politely petitioning for a change in market regulations or protesting a new tax they felt was unfair. Their power was in their unity, a reminder to the authorities that while one vendor could be easily ignored, 100 organized vendors represented a significant block of voters and a potential source of public unrest. For the individual seller, his collegium was more than a club. It was an alternate family, a source of identity and respect in a world that often denied him both. A child's voice would have been just one more thread in the city's commercial symphony. For many Roman children, especially those from poor or enslaved families, the street was not a playground but a workplace. They were a common sight, their small frames navigating the crowded thoroughfares as they hawked simple, lightweight goods. A boy might carry a tray of walnuts or dried figs, his high-pitched call cutting through the deeper shouts of the adult vendors. A girl could be selling small bouquets of violets or roses, appealing to passers-by for a romantic gesture or a small offering for a household shrine. These were not items that required great strength to carry, but they demanded a different kind of endurance, the resilience to spend long hours on your feet, exposed to the elements and the constant jostle of the crowd. For these children, a handful of coins at the end of the day was not pocket money. It was a vital contribution to their family's survival. Their presence was often a matter of grim necessity. In a freedman's family, every pair of hands was needed to keep the thermopolium running. A child might be tasked with stirring the large pot of pulse to prevent it from burning, or with running to the baker to fetch the day's bread. They would learn the rhythms of commerce by watching their parents haggle, their ears attuned to the specific calls that attracted customers. For the children of enslaved vendors, the situation was even more stark. They were assets, their labor belonging to their master from a very young age. A master might see a small, charming child as an effective sales tool, putting them out front to sell flowers or pastries, leveraging their innocence to soften the hearts of potential customers. Their childhood was functionally over, their days structured around the same relentless economic pressures that governed their parents' lives. The risks they faced were immense. The same crowded streets that offered customers also hid pickpockets and more dangerous predators. A child carrying a tray of goods or a small pouch of the day's earnings was a vulnerable target. There was no protective authority figure constantly watching over them. They were left to develop their own street smarts, a sharp-eyed wariness that was essential for their safety and for safeguarding their meager inventory. A spilled tray of nuts or a dropped bunch of flowers could mean a severe beating from a desperate parent or a cruel master. The loss of those coins, a genuine catastrophe for a family living on the edge. Their world was one of miniature responsibilities and adult-sized consequences, a harsh introduction to the realities of Roman life that began almost as soon as they could walk and talk. What kind of future awaited a child who grew up not with a stylus in their hand, but with a merchant's scale? While the independent vendor relied on his own hustle, the Roman state operated the largest and most powerful food distributor of all. This was the annona, a massive, state-run system that distributed free or subsidized grain to hundreds of thousands of citizen families. The annona was not a market, it was a right of citizenship, a monumental effort by the emperors to ensure the political stability of the city by filling its most important stomachs. Think of it as the ultimate public works project, a form of state vending that operated on a scale no private seller could ever match. Where a street vendor competed for attention with his voice, the annona moved with the silent, crushing weight of imperial bureaucracy. Its supply chain stretched across the Mediterranean, from the grain-rich provinces of Egypt and North Africa. Enormous fleets of ships, organized and protected by the Roman navy, carried thousands of tons of grain each year to the port of Ostia. From there, the grain was transferred to riverboats and hauled up the Tiber to massive warehouses in Rome, the Horia. This was logistics on an imperial scale, a system designed to feed 1 million people not through competition, but through central planning and control. The distribution itself was a spectacle of state power. Eligible male citizens, the heads of households, would line up not at a colorful thermopolium counter, but at a designated state warehouse. They presented a token, a tessera, that proved their right to the monthly dole. Officials then dispensed a set ration of unmilled wheat, measured out with state-approved precision. There was no haggling, no choice, and no variety. You received your grain, and that was that. This system created a fundamental duality in how Rome was fed. The private entrepreneurial vendor offered choice, speed, and hot, prepared food. He sold lentils, sausages, wine, and stew, catering to immediate desires and varied tastes. The state Annona provided one thing: raw grain, the absolute caloric bedrock of survival. A family receiving the dole had the foundation of their diet covered, but they still relied on the street vendor for everything else: for the oil to cook with, the vegetables for their porridge, the wine to drink, and the ready-made meals for days when they had no time to grind and bake bread themselves. The two systems were not rivals, they were symbiotic. The Annona freed up a portion of a family's tiny income, allowing them to spend those precious coins at the thermopolium for the other necessities and small pleasures of life. In this way, the emperor himself was the city's most powerful vendor, not of sizzling sausages, but of social peace, using bread to secure the loyalty of the restless urban masses. The discarded remains of a civilization can speak more clearly than its grandest monuments, while the elegant frescoes of a thermopolium show us how vendors wanted to be seen. The ancient garbage dumps, the middens, and even the latrines tell us the unvarnished truth of what people actually ate. Archaeologists sifting through these piles of refuse are like detectives reconstructing a million forgotten meals, one broken bone and shattered pot at a time. The story they uncover is not one of lavish banquets, but of a practical, street-level diet built on a few key staples. The most common finds are animal bones, and their condition is a historical record in itself. Vast quantities of pig bones, especially from younger animals, fill these dumps, but these are not the large, meaty cuts you might expect. They are primarily lower leg bones, skull fragments, and vertebrae, the less desirable parts of the animal. This pattern points directly to the street food economy. A wealthy household would receive the prime cuts, the hams and loins. The leftover parts, the trotters, heads, and offal, were sold cheaply to street vendors. These tough, bony pieces were perfect for long, slow simmering in large pots, their collagen-rich bones adding body and flavor to the ubiquitous stews served from thermopolium counters. A customer was not buying a steak. They were buying a bowl of broth, meat scraps, and beans, a meal designed to stretch every scrap of the animal into something nourishing and affordable. Broken pottery forms another mountain of evidence. The most numerous shards come from large, courseware cooking pots, the simple kakebas used over a vendor's brazier. Their soot-blackened bases testify to constant use. Just as common are the fragments of thin, plain bowls and plates, the disposable dishes of the ancient world. A person eating on the go would likely receive their stew in a cheap, ceramic bowl, eat quickly, and then simply toss the empty dish into the nearest pile of refuse. The sheer volume of this broken tableware reveals the staggering scale of the ready-to-eat food trade. Every broken bowl represents a single transaction, a person who did not cook at home. By analyzing the residue inside these pots, scientists can now identify the ghost of a meal that vanished 2,000 years ago. Traces of olive oil, millet, and lentils confirm the literary descriptions of simple, hearty pulses. In one fascinating discovery, residue from a jar in Herculaneum revealed a mixture of fish, sheep or goat meat, and snails, a snapshot of a surprisingly complex street food dish. Perhaps the most revealing, if least glamorous, archaeological sites are the ancient latrines. By studying the preserved seeds and other plant matter from these places, researchers have built a detailed picture of the Roman digestive tract. They find evidence of a diet heavy in grains like wheat and barley, along with a wide variety of fruits, nuts, and vegetables that were available to the common person. Fig seeds are everywhere, a testament to this cheap, sweet, and portable snack. Olive pits, cherry stones, and the remains of grapes and dates show that street vendors provided more than just warm stews. They also sold fresh and dried fruits as quick energy sources. The presence of exotic spices like coriander and poppy seeds, even in these contexts, proves that the flavors of the global trade did indeed trickle down to the masses. Each tiny seed, each discarded bone, and each soot-blackened pot shard is a silent witness. Together, they form an undeniable truth that the bustling, noisy world of the street vendor was not a peripheral part of Roman life, but the very engine of its daily sustenance. The vibrant chaos of the street was captured not just in ash, but in art and verse. Roman frescoes and reliefs offer a bustling gallery of daily commerce, freezing the vendor's world in bright, enduring color. A baker, his face smudged with flour, pulls a loaf from a domed oven. A wine merchant proudly displays his amphorae, their pointed bases sunk into the ground. These images, often found in the very thermopolia they depict, were not just decoration, they were advertisements and affirmations. They showed a world of honest labor and plentiful goods, a proud self-portrait of the commercial class. The vendor in art is usually anonymous, a type rather than an individual, but his actions are rendered with careful detail, a testament to the importance of his role in the social fabric. This artistic record provides a crucial visual reality check, confirming the tools, the settings, and the sheer physicality of the trade that fed the city. Yet this sunlit, orderly depiction in paint tells only half the story. For the other half, we must turn to the voices of the elite, who viewed the same scene with profound irritation. The poet Martial, living in a small apartment above the fray, gives us the soundtrack of his misery. He complains bitterly about the specific, rhythmic shouts that shatter his peace, the schoolmaster next door, the coppersmith's hammer, and above all, the food sellers. He names them, the man advertising his lentils, another praising his warm chickpeas. For Martial, these are not the cheerful calls of commerce, but the maddening noise that prevents a cultured man from thinking or sleeping. His contemporary, Juvenal, takes this disdain to a satirical extreme. In his famous rants about city life, he paints the street vendor as part of a grotesque urban circus. He describes the dangers of a walk through Rome, where you are jostled by a massive load of timber, splashed by a slave emptying a chamber pot, and deafened by the relentless cries of the sausage seller and the pie man. In Juvenal's eyes, the vendor is not an honest laborer, but an agent of the city's filth and disorder, a symbol of everything a noble Roman should escape. These literary portraits are powerful, but they are also deeply biased, filtered through the lens of class privilege and a longing for rural quiet. They stereotype the vendor as a noisy, unwashed nuisance, an obstacle to a life of contemplation and refinement. The reality, of course, lay somewhere between the proud fresco and the bitter satire. The vendor was indeed loud, because his survival depended on it. His world was indeed messy, because he worked with fire, food, and crowds, but he was also a pillar of his community, a neighbor, a business owner, and the reason the city could function at all. The art shows us the vendor as he saw himself, essential and skilled. The literature shows us the vendor as the elite feared him, a disruptive force. To find the complete person, we must listen to both voices, and then peer through the volcanic ash at the silent, enduring evidence they left behind. That vibrant commercial hum echoing from Roman streets never truly fell silent. The model of fast, public food service engineered in the Thermopolium proved so resilient that it outlasted the empire itself. Across medieval Europe, the skeleton of Roman street vending endured in the stalls of town markets and the cries of pie sellers, a direct inheritance from those ancient counters. The fundamental human needs for quick, affordable meals and social connection persisted, simply adapting to new city walls and new currencies. This was not a reinvention, but a slow evolution of a system Rome had perfected. The Roman genius for feeding a mobile, urban populace created a blueprint that would be rediscovered again and again, whenever cities swelled and life accelerated. The spirit of Lucius and his sizzling brazier found new forms, proving that the most enduring legacies are not always carved in marble, but sometimes served from a pot on a busy corner. The most striking modern parallel arrives on four wheels. The 21st century food truck, with its compact kitchen and strategic urban parking, is the direct descendant of the Roman thermopolium. Both are ingenious responses to the same problem: how to deliver hot, prepared food to masses of people in a dense, expensive urban environment. The Roman vendor embedded his dolia jars in a stone counter. The modern one outfits a vehicle with a flat-top grill and a refrigeration unit. The core principle is identical: maximum efficiency in a minimal footprint, bringing the kitchen directly to the customer. The social role is just as profound. Just as the thermopolium was a neighborhood hub for gossip and community, the modern food truck gathering spot, or pod, creates a temporary town square for office workers and residents, a place for informal connection over a shared meal. The vibrant, competitive shouts of the Roman vendor have been replaced by curated social media feeds and eye-catching graphic wraps, but the goal is the same: to cut through the noise and capture the attention of a hungry, hurried public. Even the economic structure echoes across the millennia. The Roman street vendor, whether a freedman like Lucius or an enslaved worker, operated on the margins of the formal economy, a small-scale entrepreneur in a world of giant state systems like the Annona. Today's food truck owner navigates a similar landscape, contending with permits, health codes, and corporate competition, all while trying to carve out a sustainable niche. The Roman aedile policing weights and measures has his counterpart in the modern city health inspector. The timeless hustle for a prime location, the Roman vectigal tax for the right to use public space, is mirrored in the fierce competition for today's coveted food truck permits and parking spots. This continuity reveals something fundamental about urban life. The demand for convenient, affordable street food is not a modern luxury or a passing trend. It is a permanent feature of civilization. From the chickpea stew of the thermopolium to the Korean-Mexican fusion taco, the street has always been a place of culinary innovation and democratic access. It is a marketplace where a single idea and a lot of hard work can build a livelihood, a reality as true on the cobblestones of ancient Pompeii as it is on the asphalt of a modern city. The legacy of the Roman street vendor is all around us, in every city square where people gather not in silent contemplation, but in the lively, communal act of eating together, proving that some solutions are so perfectly human they simply never go out of style. The true legacy of the Roman street vendor is not just in the recipes they cooked, but in the economic and social blueprint they perfected. They were the essential, humming engine in a metropolis of a million, the critical link between the grand imperial supply chain and the individual citizen's empty stomach. Every sizzling sausage, every measured cup of wine, and every haggled-over trinket was a tiny, vital thread in the vast fabric of urban life. They fed the legions of laborers who built the monuments, supplied the clerks who managed the bureaucracy, and created the public spaces where news and gossip forged a shared identity. Without this chaotic, vibrant, and resilient network of small-scale commerce, the city of Rome, in all its legendary power, would simply have ground to a halt. Their world, preserved in ash and echoed in verse, feels both incredibly distant and strangely familiar. The next time you walk through a bustling city market, or pause at a modern food truck, listen for the ghost of that ancient rhythm. Beneath the scent of sizzling meat and the calls of vendors, you can almost hear the echo of a Roman voice, still hawking his wares across 2,000 years. Every city street holds these hidden histories, layers of lives spent in the relentless, essential, and enduring hustle of